Hi everybody, it is Scott here from the Introvert Power channel. I wanted to expand on a topic that I spoke about last week in a video about the INFJ and the INFP, and some talk about people confusing their types, meaning that there's talk that there's INFJs that are actually INFPs, and so I just wanted to expand on that a little bit in this video. So I've drawn up the INFJ and the INFP stack here, and I wanted to talk about the sixth function for both the INFJ and the INFP, and they both share the other's dominant function as their sixth shadow function. So the INFJ, their sixth shadow function is called, is the Fi function, which is the INFP's dominant function. And the INFP has Ni as their sixth shadow function, which is the INFJ's dominant function. So this might help to explain some of the confusion for people. Sixth function is also called the critical parent function, and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to look at that function as though it's like the inner child, if you like, of the person, and that when that function is triggered in some way, that it impacts on the rest of the person's functional stack in regards to the MBTI. So before I go into that, I want to talk a little bit about the dominant functions of each type, and how I see them. So the Ni for the INFJ, I see that function as something that it's a function that really doesn't go by feel. If anything, it's like when the INFJ has that aha moment, or the yes, that's it moment, it's almost devoid of feeling. It's, in fact, when there's feeling, the feeling is saying that if there's feeling attached to the intuition, it's informing the intuition that they haven't quite got down to something yet, or something just doesn't fit right. But when it does fit right, it's like a piece of a puzzle. When it clicks into place, it just fits right. It feels right. I don't want to use the word feel. It sits right. And if I was to over-explain it in a way, it's like, I want to use the word nirvana, but not in any sort of mystical, spiritual sense, but a sense of neutrality. It just is. It just fits right, and there's not really feeling attached to the Ni moment. And the introverted intuition is always, while it's touching on a whole lot of different areas within the Ni. I might be thinking about this over here and that over there and this down here, and seemingly unrelated. When it comes to a point, there's like a unique idea or thought or insight into all of those things that emerges. So the introverted intuition is always, I think, trying to get to a destination. Whether you could call it closure or sort of completing a thought, if you like. Like even with me explaining this, I'm trying to get to a place and sort of to kind of get it and then move on. For the INFP's Fi function is more there's no conclusion as such. It is based on feeling, but it's incredibly complex. And in some ways, it's I see it kind of like the introverted intuition function in regards to its ability to sort of branch out and think of a whole lot of different ideas. But it's got feeling attached to it. And with the NI, it's more about, it could be about interpersonal ideas, but it could be about organisations and family background. Like there could be a range of different internal and external thoughts in the NI thinking. For the INFP, I think a lot of those, the landscape of the FI is more about their identity and their sense of self. And it's not about coming to any conclusion in regards to that inner world. It's more about adding. And so if there's any questions for the INFP, they're not so much interested in the answer as to go on a journey of helping to inform that question, but rather than answer it, it might change the question or give a new angle on the question, create a new question, and it's forever getting larger and larger. So I guess just for this video, that's how I'll sort of frame, I guess, the two dominant functions for each. So one of the ideas that I want to present today is that the INFJ can't do introverted feeling very well, and the INFP can't do introverted intuition very well. But in some ways they can be confused and maybe even become enmeshed in some way. So I think in some respects, I think the INFJ likes to think, without really realizing it in some ways, that they can do introverted feeling well, but I don't think so. I think when an INFJ is really working well within their functional stack, introverted feeling has very little to do with it, with very little to do with the INFJ's world and the way that they process information and approach life. The feeling, as you know, the second function states, it's more extroverted feeling, so it's more an atmosphere, picking up on other people's feelings, and using their intuition to gauge the atmosphere. But in regards to introverted feeling, I think it's by and large a feeling that needs to be acknowledged but avoided, and I'll unpack that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And the same is for the INFP in regards to their sixth function, critical parent function, introverted intuition. So my guess would be that the INFP doesn't do introverted intuition very well. But again, the FI and the NI, I think, can get enmeshed a little bit. So I'll unpack that more in a moment. So for the INFJ, I think what can happen is when their feelings are hurt down in here, it can come up and take a more dominant position within the functional stack. And in a sense, almost like pollute, if you like, the functional stack. It throws it out of whack. And the thing with, because the INFJ doesn't do introverted feeling well, when the introverted feeling is triggered in some way, it's like it overwhelms the internal world of the INFJ. And because it's such a strong sensation, it can trick the INFJ into thinking that what it is experiencing is the truth. So from that hurt feeling can come thoughts and ideas and ways of dealing with that hurt feeling that seems so real to the INFJ, but it's actually giving false information. It's not accurate, and it's not helpful. But because it feels so real, I think the INFJ can sort of be seduced into listening to the FI function. And when that happens, basing decisions and actions upon a shadow function is going to bring unhelpful results, if you like, or unhelpful outcomes and inaccurate outcomes. And I think it's the same for the INFP, but just the opposite. So it's a little bit harder to explain. I guess being an INFJ, seeing the Ni function as a very positive function, I need to sort of see how it could be a negative. So I'll attempt to try to explain that, and I just invite the INFPs out there to just give some feedback into whether this sits right or feels right. So when the INFP's critical parent function is triggered in some way, it comes up and takes a dominant position within the functional stack of the INFP and sabotages the functional stack. And so my sense with that happening, and the triggers that could trigger the sixth function in both types could be the same. It could be criticism, it could be rejection, it could be anything. So the trigger could be the same for both types, but the way it manifests is different. So when the INFP is triggered in some way, and the introverted intuition comes up and becomes a more dominant function within the INFP and it sabotages, if you like, the functional stack, I think the way it could operate is really the INFP is doing introverted intuition and they're getting stuck there because they're not using their internal feeling to work something out. They're almost trying to use a more, it's not so much rational, but more maybe a clinical way maybe of trying to solve a problem. So they might be thinking it's within the hurt, rather because the introverted feeling would be experienced quite intensely because they're already introverted feeling. Then when they're hurt, it floods a deep sense of hurt into the FI, meaning it needs to almost be avoided, and so they drop into their introverted intuition sixth shadow function, and to try to get away from that pain feeling and try and think through the issue without feeling, using that Ni function, which is, I can't quite find the words to use, but it's like thinking about things without using feeling. That's my sense of it anyway. And I guess you could call it a defense mechanism or a self-protection or whatever, but it's trying, the INFP is trying to solve the problem whilst avoiding the hurt feeling, but it's actually in their feeling, using feeling, which helps them to solve problems. And they can get stuck in that Ni shadow function. So that's my attempt to try to explain that. And I invite INFPs to give some feedback into how they, if what I'm saying resonates, how you would describe that. So this, I guess what I'm presenting here might sort of add hopefully some value to the discussion about the type confusions between INFJ and INFP. In that an INFJ might be coming across as an INFP because they're getting lost in their FI function and talking from that place, and it's coming across as very melancholy or wishy-washy or something like that, and so they're coming off as INFPs, when in fact they might only be just stuck in their FI function. And the same for the INFP. I'm not sure if INFPs can come across as INFJs. They may do if they get stuck in their NI function when they're trying to work out an issue without feeling. And I think one way that would come across maybe is the INFP sharing intuitively but not getting anywhere. The connections seem to be related, but they're not really, and there's a sense of getting lost there. And so they may come across as INFJs, but whether they do or not, when an INFP gets lost in NI, it disrupts their ability to be able to process their FI function. So I think a way to find out if we're an NI user or an FI user is if the INFJ is using feeling to work out an issue, and it's going pear-shaped, it's not working, it's cloudy, then they might be using their FI function, sixth shadow function, and disrupting their ability to work something out. Or if the INFJ has a sense that they do use feeling to work life out, and they use it well, then they may be an INFP, or at least they're not an INFJ if they're using feeling. And I think the same can be said for the INFP, just sort of in reverse. If they're using intuition rather than feeling to work things out, and it's working for them, then they may not be an INFP. They might be an INFJ or another type. So I think a possible way to approach this would be for the INFJ is to just, I guess, monitor their feeling, if you like, and when it's probably easier when feelings are hurt rather than when it's a positive feeling, although I think the INFJ is as equally vulnerable to making poor choices, whether the feeling is positive and euphoric or very negative and depressing. So if the INFJ has hurt feeling, an approach would be to acknowledge it, not to suppress the feeling, but to both acknowledge it, and by acknowledging it, it sort of makes it sort of appear more, or once it is acknowledged, then it can be contained in a sense, and it's not so much likely to overwhelm the functional stack and kind of pollute it, if you like, if it's identified. Okay, my feelings are hurt. Now, if I'm an INFJ, I don't do hurt feeling very well, so I need to acknowledge it and not make any decisions on it or base any conclusions around it or take any action on it. I just need to see that it's a sixth function critical parent that's coming out of me, and that I need to allow the feeling to subside so that I can use my intuition to make a decision rather than through hurt feeling. So it's kind of a paradox in some ways. The hurt feeling or the introverted feeling needs to be acknowledged, but then put aside in regards to making any decisions based on what the hurt feeling is saying. And I think it's true also for the INFP. If something's happening that's overwhelming them, and it's causing the FI, like the feeling in the FI to just to get too much, they might slip into using introverted intuition, which would be a really dulling experience, I would think. To acknowledge that, okay, I'm going into a sort of I just call it an introverted intuition space. So acknowledging that, not making any decisions on it. I think that's the key, is to not base it in any sense of truth. It's just not helpful. Allowing it to sort of fade into the background so that the introverted feeling is able to make more sound decisions based on whatever it is that's happening. So to summarise, I think what happens for both the INFJ and the INFP and all the other types as well is that when they're triggered in some way, in a negative way, it can affect the the number 6 shadow function, critical parent function, and it brings it up into more of a dominant position within the stack, polluting the whole system, creating unhelpful outcomes and conclusions. So the idea is to acknowledge when this is happening, not make any decisions based on it, put it to one side, almost compartmentalize it in some respects, which might be a bit more challenging for the INFP because of their ability to be very complex, but be able to sort of see it, acknowledge it, put it to one side, so that the more healthier dominant function is able to operate and make decisions. So for the INFJ, they're able to access their NI, and with their INFP, they're able to access their FI.